Commander Jake Harrison never believed in destiny until the day an alien queen looked into his eyes and whispered words that would shake the foundations of 3 galaxies. In a universe where humans are considered the newest, weakest species, one man carries a secret written in his very DNA, a secret that ancient civilizations have feared for millennia. When a most powerful ruler in the known galaxy falls to her knees before a simple human soldier, the cosmos itself holds its breath. Because some legends aren't just stories. Some legends walk among us, waiting for the moment when the universe needs them most. What happens when the prey becomes the predator, and the underdog reveals claws that have been hidden since the dawn of time? What happens when humanity's greatest weakness becomes its most terrifying strength? The answer lies in the bloodline of one man who never knew he was anything more than human, until the day the truth could no longer be contained. The transport ship Endeavour shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of rapid deceleration. Commander Jake Harrison gripped the armrest of his seat, his knuckles white against the reinforced plastic. Around him, 24 of Earth's finest soldiers sat in similar states of barely controlled tension. This wasn't their first deployment to an alien world, but something about this mission felt different. Wrong, even. Approaching Kepler 442b, announced Lieutenant Sarah Chun from the pilot's seat. Her voice carried the same unease that had been plaguing the crew since they'd received their orders 3 days ago. Visual contact with the Zephyrian capital city in 30 seconds. Jake released his grip and stood, moving to the viewport with practiced ease despite the ship's continued vibrations. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The city below wasn't the primitive settlement their briefings had suggested. Massive crystalline spires stretched toward the purple sky, their surfaces pulsing with an inner light that seemed almost alive. Energy fields shimmered between the structures like aurora made solid, and creatures that could only be described as dragons soared between the towers in perfect formation. "Sir," whispered Sergeant Mike Torres, joining him at the viewport. "That's not what the intelligence reports showed us. They said the Zephyrians were barely past Stone Age technology." Jake nodded grimly. The Galactic Council had painted a very different picture when they'd requested human assistance in what they called a minor diplomatic incident. According to them, a small faction of Zephyrians had been causing trouble on the trade routes, nothing more than organized piracy that required a show of force to resolve. Looking at the advanced city below, Jake realized they'd been played. The communication panel crackled to life, and a voice speaking perfect standard galactic filled the cabin. "Human vessel, you are cleared for landing at coordinate 77 Alpha. A diplomatic escort will meet you upon arrival. Welcome to Zephyria Prime." Jake exchanged glances with Chun. The voice had been female, melodious in a way that made his spine tingle, and far too sophisticated for a species supposedly struggling with basic metallurgy. He keyed his comm unit to the ship's general frequency. "All units, listen up. It's clear our intelligence was either wrong or deliberately falsified. From this moment forward, we treat this as a potential hostile first contact scenario. Weapons on standby, but do not engage unless directly threatened. Our mission parameters have just changed from peacekeeping to survival." The landing pad they were directed to sat at the edge of the crystalline city, a perfectly circular platform that hummed with energy. As the Endeavour settled onto its surface, Jake felt a strange, tingling sensation run through his body, as if the very air was charged with something beyond mere electricity. His soldiers filed out behind him, their expressions alert and ready despite the obvious disparity in technology levels. The welcoming committee was unlike anything in Jake's extensive xenobiology training. The Zephyrians stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies a fascinating blend of reptilian and mammalian features. Their skin shifted between deep purple and silver like living metal, and their eyes held an intelligence that seemed far older than their civilization should have been capable of producing. But it was the figure at the center of the group that made Jake's breath stop entirely. She was clearly their leader, wearing robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself, stars twinkling in their depths. Her presence radiated authority in a way that made every instinct Jake possess scream warnings. But more than that, as her gaze fixed on him, he felt something stirring deep in his chest, a warmth that spread through his body like liquid fire. "I am Ambassador Thysa of the Third Conclave," the leader announced, her voice the same one they'd heard on the comm. "But, more importantly, I am here at the direct request of our queen. She wishes to meet with your commander personally." Jake stepped forward, noting how his soldiers tensed behind him. "Commander Jake Harrison, representing the Terran Federation. We're here at the request of the Galactic Council regarding reported piracy issues in this sector." Thysa's expression shifted, something that might have been amusement flickering in her ancient eyes. "Yes, the Galactic Council. They have such interesting perspectives on galactic politics. Our queen is most eager to discuss these piracy issues with you directly, Commander Harrison." The way she said his name sent another wave of that strange warmth through his body. Jake found himself nodding before he'd consciously decided to agree. "Very well, but my team comes with me." "Of course," Thysa replied smoothly. "Though I should warn you, our queen has very specific requirements for audiences. Your weapons will need to remain here, and only you will be permitted into the inner sanctum. Your team may wait in our hospitality chambers." Every instinct Jake had screamed against agreeing to those terms. Separating from his team, going into an unknown alien structure unarmed, trusting beings who had already demonstrated they weren't what they'd been portrayed as. But that warmth in his chest was spreading, and with it came a certainty he couldn't explain. "Agreed," he heard himself saying, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from Sergeant Torres behind him. The journey to the Queen's Palace took them through the heart of the Crystal City, and Jake found himself constantly amazed by the sophistication of Zephyrian culture. Advanced holographic displays showed star charts that included systems Jake had never heard of, and the technology integrated so seamlessly into their architecture that it seemed almost organic. Citizens moved through the streets with a grace that spoke of perfect health and contentment, their clothing shifting colors in response to their moods. "Your people seem quite advanced for a civilization that supposedly hasn't mastered spaceflight," Jake commented as they walked through a plaza where fountains of pure energy danced in impossible patterns. Thysa's laugh was like silver bells in a gentle breeze. "Oh, Commander Harrison, we mastered spaceflight long before your species learned to make fire. The question you should be asking is why we've chosen to let the galaxy believe otherwise." That stopped Jake in his tracks. The implications were staggering. If the Zephyrians possessed advanced technology and had been hiding it, then everything about this mission was wrong. The Galactic Council, the piracy reports, even their own presence here. "Why?" he asked simply. Thysa turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his heart race. Recognition. "Because we've been waiting, Commander. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the right person. Waiting for you." Before Jake could process that statement fully, they arrived at the palace. It rose from the center of the city like a living mountain of crystal and light, its surfaces reflecting not just the physical world, but something deeper, something that seemed to show glimpses of other times and places. As they approached the main entrance, the massive doors swung open without any visible mechanism, revealing a corridor that stretched impossibly far into the distance. The throne room, when they finally reached it, defied every law of physics Jake understood. The space seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with galleries of observers existing at angles that shouldn't have been possible. But all of that faded to insignificance when he saw the Queen. She sat upon a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, but what held Jake's attention was her face. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species barriers, but more than that, she was familiar. Impossibly, inexplicably familiar, as if he'd seen her face in dreams he couldn't quite remember. When she spoke, her voice resonated not just in the air, but in Jake's bones, in his very soul. "Commander Jake Harrison of Earth, the Lost Prince has finally come home." The warmth in Jake's chest exploded into a raging inferno. Power he'd never known he possessed surged through his body, and suddenly, the throne room was filled with a light that seemed to emanate from his very skin. Around him, the assembled Zephyrians fell to their knees, but Jake only had eyes for the Queen as she rose from her throne and walked toward him. "Impossible," he whispered, but even as he said it, he knew it was true. Somehow, impossibly, he knew exactly what she meant. The Queen stopped just inches from him, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing every detail. When she reached out to touch his cheek, her fingers left trails of starlight on his skin. "My ancestors spoke of this day for 10,000 years," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of prophecy fulfilled. "They told us that when the stars aligned and the galaxy faced its greatest threat, the lost prince would return to claim his birthright. They told us he would come not as conqueror, but as protector. Not as king, but as guardian." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the vast space. "The legends are true. You're him." Jake felt something deep inside him shift and awaken, like a lock clicking open after millennia. Memories that weren't his own flooded his mind. Images of ancient wars fought between the stars, of a great enemy that devoured worlds, of a bloodline preserved across countless generations in preparation for this moment. "But I'm human," he protested weakly, even as the truth blazed in his consciousness. The queen smiled, and in that smile was the warmth of 1,000 suns. "Oh, my dear prince, humanity was never the newest species in the galaxy. It was the oldest, and you are the last of the eternal kings, the guardians who stood watch over creation itself." As the implications of her words sank in, Jake felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. But with it came a strength he'd never imagined possible, and a purpose that stretched beyond anything he'd ever dreamed. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their adaptability or their courage. It had been their patience and their ability to remain hidden until the universe needed them most. The Lost Prince had awakened, and the real war was about to begin. The transformation began slowly, like dawn breaking over a world that had known only night. Jake stood in the Queen's throne room, his body crackling with energy that seemed to rewrite his very molecular structure. The memories flooding his mind weren't random images anymore. They were organizing themselves into coherent histories, strategic databases, and tactical knowledge that spanned millions of years. Queen Lyralii watched with eyes that reflected both joy and sorrow as Jake's human appearance began to shift. His skin took on a subtle luminescence, his eyes deepened to contain flecks of starlight, and his presence expanded until it filled the vast chamber with an authority that made even the ancient Zephyrians bow their heads in reverence. "The awakening is painful," Lyralii said softly, approaching him with careful steps. "Your human genetics were designed to suppress your true nature until the moment was right. Now that the seals are breaking, you'll remember not just who you are, but why you were hidden." Jake's vision split between the present moment and flashes of the past. He saw Earth as it truly was, not humanity's birth world, but a carefully constructed sanctuary where the last of the eternal kings could mature in safety. He saw the great war that had scattered his people across the galaxy, and the desperate plan that had led to humanity's seemingly primitive development. "The Devourers," he whispered, the name emerging from genetic memories buried in his DNA. "They're coming back." Lyralii nodded grimly. "Our long-range sensors detected the first scout ships 3 months ago. They're still beyond the galactic rim, but their advanced forces are already probing our outer defenses. The Galactic Council knows nothing of this. They've forgotten the old warnings, dismissed them as myth and legend." The memories crystallized with sudden clarity. The Devourers weren't just an alien species. They were something far worse. A hive mind that consumed not just matter and energy, but consciousness itself. They had swept through 3 galaxies before reaching this one, leaving nothing behind but empty space and the screams of entire civilizations absorbed into their collective hunger. "How long do we have?" Jake asked, his voice carrying new harmonics that made the crystal walls resonate. "Our calculations suggest 18 months before their main fleet arrives." "But, Jake," Lyralii's voice carried a weight of terrible knowledge. "They're not coming randomly. They're coming because they've sensed your awakening. The Eternal Kings were the only force that ever successfully opposed them. They thought they destroyed your entire bloodline 10,000 years ago." Jake felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders, but with it came a fierce determination that burned away his human doubts. This was why he'd always felt different, why he'd excelled in every military scenario, why he could read battlefield situations with an intuition that bordered on prophecy. He wasn't just a human soldier. He was the last guardian of an ancient order. "I need my team," he said, the statement carrying the authority of absolute command. "And I need the truth about Earth." Lyralii gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. It showed Earth, but not as any human had ever seen it. Energy patterns crisscrossed the planet's surface like a vast geometric web, and structures that had been hidden for millennia pulsed with dormant power. "Earth is a fortress world," she explained. "Every major human city sits atop an ancient weapons platform. Your pyramids, your stone circles, even your modern metropolises, they're all built on eternal king technology that's been waiting for your bloodline to reactivate it." Jake studied the display with eyes that could now perceive the quantum structures underlying the hologram. His genetic memories were providing tactical assessments automatically. Earth could hold against a Devourer's assault, but only if its defenses were properly awakened and coordinated. "The humans don't know any of this," he said. It wasn't a question. They couldn't know. The psychological conditioning required to hide your nature also suppressed their collective memory of their true origins. As far as they're concerned, they evolved naturally from primates and developed space flight on their own. Lyralii's expression grew sad. It was the only way to keep the secret. If even one human had known the truth, the Devourers would have sensed it across the void. The throne room's massive doors opened, and Ambassador Thysa entered with Jake's team behind her. Sergeant Torres took one look at his transformed commander and immediately reached for a sidearm. Then stopped as his hand passed through empty air. "What did you do to him?" Torres demanded, his voice tight with controlled aggression. Jake turned to face his soldiers, and they all took an involuntary step back. The man they'd served under was still recognizably there, but he now radiated a presence that made their survival instincts scream warnings about predators far beyond their ability to fight. "I'm still me, Mike," Jake said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to speak directly to their genetic memory. "But I'm also something more. Something I was always meant to be." He gestured to the holographic display. "Look at this, and tell me what you see." Sergeant Torres approached cautiously, his training warring with instincts that told him he was in the presence of something that transcended normal understanding. As he studied the image of Earth, his eyes widened. "Sir, those patterns? I've seen them before. In the briefing materials for the Mars colonies. The geological surveys showed similar structures under every human settlement. Because we built our cities where the ancient sites were," Jake replied, genetic memory guiding us to the places we needed to be. He looked at each of his soldiers in turn. "Earth isn't our home world. It's our fortress. And all of you carry the same hidden genetics I do, just in dormant form." Lieutenant Shun stepped forward, her scientific background making her more willing to accept impossible explanations than her military training suggested. "Sir, are you saying we're all what?" "Sleeper agents for some ancient alien civilization." "Not alien," Lyralii interjected, her voice gentle but firm. "The Eternal Kings were the first species to achieve consciousness in this galaxy. Every other sapient race carries echoes of their genetic template, but humans are their direct descendants. You're not aliens pretending to be human. You're humans remembering what humanity really means." The implications hit Jake's team like a physical blow. Their entire understanding of their place in the universe shifted, and Jake could see the same awakening beginning in their eyes that he'd experienced himself. "The Galactic Council," Specialist Rodriguez said slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind. "They've been treating us like primitives since first contact. But if we're really the descendants of the galaxy's former guardians, then every other species has genetic memories of either serving us or fearing us," Jake finished. "The Council has been deliberately keeping humanity suppressed because they're terrified of what we might become if we remembered our true nature." Thysa nodded approvingly. "Your species' rapid expansion, your adaptability, your natural tactical genius. It all makes sense when you understand what you really are. The Council has been feeding you limited technology and keeping you focused on internal conflicts to prevent exactly what's happening right now." Jake felt his tactical mind analyzing the broader situation with crystalline clarity. Humanity had been systematically isolated from galactic politics, their colonies scattered in such a way that they couldn't easily unite. Their military kept busy with minor conflicts that prevented them from developing their true potential. How many other species know the truth? He asked. Very few, Lyralii admitted. The Zephyrians retained the old knowledge because we were the Eternal King's closest allies. A handful of others remember fragments, but most have convinced themselves it's all mythology. Jake's enhanced perception was already calculating the forces they'd need, the time required to awaken Earth's defenses, and the political complexities of revealing the truth to both humanity and the galaxy at large. But beneath all the strategic thinking was a deeper understanding. This wasn't just about military preparation. I need to see Earth, he said finally. I need to begin the awakening process. And I need to contact the other human colonies without the Council knowing. Lyralii smiled, and for the first time since his transformation began, Jake saw hope in her expression. We've been preparing for this moment for 10,000 years. We have ships, communication networks, and allies the Council doesn't know about. Everything you need to reclaim your birthright. As if summoned by her words, the air in the center of the throne room shimmered, and a figure materialized that made even Jake's enhanced senses reel in shock. The newcomer appeared to be human, but his presence carried the weight of geological ages. When he spoke, his voice held a resonance of stellar formations. My prince, the figure said, dropping to one knee in a gesture that somehow elevated rather than diminished his obvious power. I'm Admiral Marcus Thorne, Guardian of the Hidden Fleet. We have waited so very long for your return. Jake stared at the figure, genetic memories providing instant recognition. Admiral Thorne was one of the original Eternal Kings, placed in stasis to guide the awakening when the time came. His presence meant that Jake wasn't truly the last of his kind. Others had survived, hidden throughout the galaxy, waiting for this moment. How many? Jake asked, understanding flowing between them without need for detailed explanation. 12 sleeping kings scattered across the outer rim, 300 Guardian-class vessels in hidden anchorages, and approximately 50 million humans in colonies the Council doesn't know exist. Thorne's smile was predatory. The Devourers destroyed our empire, but they didn't destroy our people. We've had 10,000 years to prepare for their return. As the full scope of the situation became clear, Jake felt the last of his human limitations fall away. He was no longer Commander Jake Harrison of the Terran Federation. He was the lost prince awakened, the heir to a galactic empire thought destroyed, and the last hope against a horror that consumed entire galaxies. The war for the survival of consciousness itself was about to begin, and humanity was finally ready to remember why the galaxy had once trembled at their name. But first, they had to convince 3 billion humans that everything they thought they knew about themselves was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep them safe until the universe needed its guardians to return. The real challenge wouldn't be fighting the Devourers. It would be awakening a species that had forgotten it was born to rule the stars. The journey back to Earth took 3 days aboard Admiral Thorne's flagship, the Eternal Vigilance, but it might as well have been 3 lifetimes for Jake Harrison. The ship itself defied every principle of physics he'd learned as a human, moving through dimensions that didn't have names in any terrestrial language. Yet his awakened consciousness understood its workings as naturally as breathing. The hardest part, Thorne explained as they stood on the ship's observation deck, watching reality fold around them, will be awakening the others without triggering psychological collapse. Humans have spent 10,000 years believing they're a young species struggling to find their place in the galaxy. Learning they're actually the galaxy's former rulers will shatter many minds. Jake nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed Earth's true structure. Every major city pulsed with dormant energy signatures that his enhanced perception could now read like text. New York sat atop a planetary defense command center. London covered a manufacturing complex that could produce weapons capable of cracking moons. Tokyo was built over a computational matrix that could coordinate fleets across multiple galaxies simultaneously. We start with the military leadership, Jake decided. They're already trained to accept impossible situations and adapt quickly. Once we have a core group of awakened humans, we can begin the broader revelation process. Lieutenant Chun approached from the ship's navigation station, her expression troubled. Sir, I've been analyzing the sensor data Admiral Thorne shared with us. The Devourer Scout ships, they're not just randomly approaching. They're following specific flight paths that will bring them to Earth first. Thorne's expression darkened. They remember the last war. They know that Earth was the heart of the Eternal King Empire, even if they don't know why it was abandoned. If they can corrupt or destroy Earth's defensive grid before we fully activate it. The galaxy falls, Jake finished. The weight of that reality settled on him like a physical force. Every world, every species, every thinking being in a galaxy depended on humanity remembering its true nature in time to mount a defense. The ship's communication array chimed with an incoming message, and Ambassador Theis's voice filled the observation deck. My prince, we're receiving reports from our deep space sensors. The Devourer Advanced Fleet has accelerated. They'll reach the outer rim in 14 months, not 18. Jake felt his tactical mind shift into high gear, calculating revised timelines and resource allocations. 14 months to awaken a species, reactivate planetary defenses that have been dormant for millennia, and prepare for a war against an enemy that had consumed entire galaxies. Admiral, what's the status of the Sleeping Kings? He asked. Thorne manipulated a holographic control, and 12 star systems appeared in the air before them. All 12 are in stable stasis, but awakening them will require significant energy expenditure. Each awakening will send quantum resonance waves that the Devourers might detect. Then, we awaken them simultaneously, Jake decided. If we're going to announce our presence, we might as well do it with enough force to give them pause. He turned to his team, who had been quietly absorbing the conversation. Mike, I need you to contact every human colony commander you can reach through unofficial channels. Tell them there's a classified briefing that requires their immediate attention. Don't mention specifics over open channels. Sergeant Torres nodded, his natural leadership instincts adapting to the expanded scope of their mission. Sir, some of them won't believe it. The idea that humanity is some kind of ancient galactic empire. Then, we'll have to show them, Jake replied. He gestured to the approaching blue-white disk of Earth, now visible through the observation windows. Every human carries the genetic keys to access Eternal King technology. Once they see it respond to their presence, belief will follow. As they entered Earth's solar system, Jake felt something stirring in his consciousness. Not memories this time, but active connections. The planetary defense grid was sensing his presence and beginning to wake from its long slumber. Throughout Earth, ancient systems that had been disguised as natural geological formations for 10,000 years began drawing power from the planet's core. The Yellowstone caldera, Chun said suddenly, reading data from her portable scanner. Sir, it's not a volcanic formation at all. It's a massive energy collector. The Marianas Trench is a manufacturing facility, Rodriguez added, his voice filled with awe. And the Sahara Desert, it's a sensor array that's been monitoring the entire galaxy. Jake smiled as his genetic memories provided confirmation of their discoveries. Humanity had been living on top of the most advanced military installation ever constructed, believing it was just their home planet. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so catastrophically high. The eternal vigilance descended through Earth's atmosphere without triggering any of the planet's detection systems. Thorne's ship was broadcasting Eternal King identification codes that overrode all security protocols. They landed in a remote area of the Nevada desert, where the sand itself began to shift and flow as buried structures recognized the presence of their rightful rulers. This is where we begin, Jake said as the ship's exit ramp lowered. Earth's primary command center is 3 miles directly beneath us. It's been waiting for an Eternal King to claim it for 10,000 years. The descent through the newly opened passages was like traveling through the arteries of a living titan. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that responded to their presence, and the air itself seemed charged with potential energy. Jake's team followed in stunned silence, their worldview reorganizing itself around each new impossibility they witnessed. The command center, when they finally reached it, defied description. It existed in a space that was simultaneously vast and intimate, with control surfaces that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions while remaining within easy reach. The moment Jake stepped onto the central platform, every system in the facility came online with a harmonic resonance that could be felt in the bones. Welcome home, my prince, the facility's artificial intelligence said, its voice carrying warmth that spoke of genuine affection rather than mere programmed responses. All planetary systems are responding to your presence. Shall I begin the awakening sequence? Jake placed his hand on what appeared to be a simple crystal surface, but was actually a quantum interface capable of coordinating galactic-scale operations. Through it, he could sense every human on Earth, 3 billion minds carrying dormant genetic patterns that were beginning to stir in response to his awakened presence. Begin with the military leadership, he ordered. Start with those who already have security clearance for unusual phenomena. We'll work our way up the chain of command and out to the general population. Across the globe, carefully selected individuals began receiving messages that couldn't be ignored, not because of their urgency, but because they spoke directly to genetic memories that had been sleeping in every human cell. Admiral Susan Blake, commander of Earth's defensive forces, found herself staring at a communication panel that displayed star charts she somehow knew despite never having seen them before. General Harrison Wright discovered that his office computer was accessing databases that officially didn't exist, but felt as familiar as his own name. Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, head of the Solar System Research Institute, walked in her laboratory to find every piece of equipment displaying the same impossible readings. Energy signatures that indicated vast structures beneath every major city on Earth. Structures that her instruments insisted had been there for thousands of years despite all evidence to the contrary. The awakening spread like ripples in a pond, each newly aware individual triggering responses in those around them. Within 6 hours of Jake's activation of the command center, over 50,000 humans had experienced some level of genetic memory activation. Most dismissed it as stress or fatigue, but enough began investigating to create a cascade effect. President Sarah Chun, no relation to Lieutenant Chun despite the shared surname, found herself in the Oval Office at 3 in the morning, staring at a holographic display that had materialized without any technological explanation. The display showed her things that should have been impossible. Fleets of ships moving between the stars, weapons capable of destroying planets, and at the center of it all, a familiar face. Commander Harrison, she whispered, recognizing Jake despite his transformation. What have you discovered? The communication was instantaneous despite the vast distance. Jake's enhanced abilities allowing him to interface directly with Earth's planetary consciousness. Madam President, I need you to gather the Joint Chiefs, the heads of every space agency, and anyone with clearance above cosmic level. What I'm about to tell you will change everything. Within 12 hours, the most powerful people on Earth were gathered in a conference room that officially didn't exist deep beneath the Pentagon. Jake appeared before them not as a hologram, but as a quantum projection, his presence so real they could feel the energy radiating from him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to their genetic memories. Everything you think you know about humanity is wrong. We are not a young species struggling to find our place in the galaxy. We are the galaxy's former guardians, placed in protective dormancy until the universe needed us again. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some officials demanded proof, others questioned his sanity, and a few simply sat in stunned silence as suppressed memories began surfacing in their minds. But as Jake began demonstrating abilities that no human should have possessed, manipulating matter at the quantum level, accessing computer systems through pure thought, displaying knowledge of star charts that covered galaxies beyond current human exploration, skepticism gave way to amazed acceptance. The Galactic Council has been deliberately suppressing our development, Jake continued, because they fear what we might become if we remembered our true nature. But that suppression has left us vulnerable to something far worse than political manipulation. He gestured, and the room's walls became windows into deep space, showing the approaching Devourer fleet in all its terrible majesty. Ships the size of moons moved through the void like living shadows, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. They consume consciousness itself, Jake explained as the assembled leaders watched in horror. Every thought, every memory, every spark of awareness gets absorbed into their collective hunger. They've destroyed 3 galaxies, and they're coming for this one. Secretary of Defense Michael Torres, Sergeant Torres's father, though neither had known the family connection until their awakening, leaned forward with grim determination. What do we need to do? Jake smiled, and in that expression was the confidence of 10,000 years of preparation. We remember who we are. We awaken our people. And we show the universe why the Eternal Kings were the only force the Devourers ever truly feared. As the briefing continued through the night, similar scenes played out in hidden facilities across the globe. Humanity was waking up from its long sleep, and with that awakening came the terrible responsibility of defending not just their own species, but every thinking being in the galaxy. The Lost Prince had returned, but the real test was yet to come. Could a species that had forgotten its true nature remember how to be galactic guardians in time to face the greatest threat the universe had ever known? The answer would determine whether consciousness itself survived the coming darkness. 3 months after the first awakening, Earth had become unrecognizable to any observer who had known it before. The transformation wasn't just technological, it was fundamental, affecting the very quantum structure of local space-time. Where once there had been a single blue world orbiting an ordinary star, now there existed the heart of what had once been the galaxy's greatest empire. Jake stood on the observation platform of the Olympus Command Station, a structure that had risen from beneath the Mediterranean Sea when Earth's awakening reached critical mass. Around him, holographic displays showed the progress of humanity's transformation with data streams that would have overwhelmed any unenhanced consciousness. Global awakening is at 67%, reported Admiral Blake, her own transformation having progressed to the point where she could interface directly with the planetary defense networks. We're seeing complete genetic activation in all major population centers, and the colonial worlds are responding to our awakening signals. Jake nodded, his attention focused on the tactical display showing the Devourer fleet's approach. They had accelerated again, sensing the massive energy signatures emanating from Earth. What had been a 14-month timeline was now down to 8 months, and the implications were staggering. Status on the Sleeping Kings? He asked Admiral Thorne, who had become his primary military advisor during the awakening process. 11 of 12 are successfully awakened, Thorne reported. King Alexios is having difficulty with his transition. 10,000 years in stasis left his neural pathways more degraded than the others. But he's stable and should be combat-ready within a month. The Awakened Kings represented more than just military leadership. Each one was a living repository of tactical knowledge and strategic wisdom accumulated over millions of years of galactic guardianship. Their combined experience would be essential for coordinating a defense against an enemy that had consumed entire galaxies. And the Galactic Council? Jake inquired, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Complete panic, Admiral Blake replied with grim satisfaction. They're demanding explanations for the energy readings coming from the Sol system. Ambassador Veltar has requested an emergency session to discuss humanity's concerning technological developments. They still think they can control us. Jake's enhanced perception allowed him to sense the broader political currents flowing through the galaxy. Fear was the dominant emotion, not just from the Council, but from every species that possessed genetic memories of the Eternal Kings. Humanity's awakening was triggering racial memories that had been suppressed for 10,000 years. Let them come, Jake decided. It's time they learn the truth about what's approaching their worlds. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened on the neutral station of Concordia Prime, a massive structure that existed in the gravitational balance point between 3 star systems. Jake's arrival aboard the Eternal Vigilance sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. Not because of the ship's obvious technological superiority, but because of the genetic terror it triggered in their collective unconscious. Council Chairman Zephyran, a member of the hegemony species that had dominated galactic politics since humanity's apparent primitiveness, struggled to maintain his composure as Jake entered the chamber. The human's presence had changed since his awakening. He now radiated authority in ways that made ancient instincts scream warnings about apex predators. Representative Harrison, Zephyran began, his voice carefully controlled. The Council requires an explanation for the massive energy signatures emanating from your system. Are humans developing weapons that violate the Concordia Accords? Jake smiled, and in that expression was 10,000 years of accumulated patience finally reaching its end. Chairman Zephyran, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's position in this galaxy. He gestured, and the chamber's central display activated without any technological interface. Images flooded the space, star charts showing the true extent of human territory, fleet compositions that dwarfed anything the Council possessed, and historical records that painted a very different picture of galactic development. Humanity isn't developing new weapons, Jake continued as shocked murmurs filled the chamber. We're remembering old ones. The revelation hit the assembled representatives like a physical blow. Species that had built their entire civilization on the assumption of human inferiority suddenly found themselves confronting evidence that their ancestors had served as vassals in a human-dominated empire. Impossible, whispered Ambassador Thylex of the Vegan Confederacy. Humans are a primitive species. You've barely mastered faster-than-light travel. We let you believe that, Jake replied, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to genetic memory. We've been sleeping, hidden among you, waiting for the moment when the galaxy would need its guardians again. That moment has arrived. The display shifted to show long-range sensor readings of the approaching Devourer fleet. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several representatives physically recoiled from the images, their species' genetic memories providing instant recognition of their greatest nightmares made manifest. The Devourers, Council Chairman Zephran whispered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. But that's impossible. They were destroyed millennia ago. They were driven from this galaxy, Jake corrected. But they've been consuming other galaxies while you forgot they ever existed. Now, they're returning to finish what they started. The chamber erupted in panic. Representatives began shouting demands for protection, accusations of deception, and pleas for mercy that revealed just how deeply the ancient memories ran. But through the chaos, one voice cut with crystalline clarity. What do you want from us? The question came from Ambassador Kthara of the Andromedans, a species Jake's genetic memories identified as having been humanity's most trusted allies during the original war. I want you to remember, Jake replied, his enhanced voice somehow reaching every representative despite the ongoing chaos. Remember who stood between you and annihilation for 3 million years. Remember who sacrificed their empire to give you time to grow and develop. Remember why the Eternal Kings earned their title. The display showed Earth as it now appeared. Not just a blue world, but a structure that spanned dimensions, bristling with weapons that could crack planets, and defenses that could withstand the death of stars. Then, it expanded to show the human colonies, each one revealing hidden capabilities that transformed mere settlements into fortress worlds capable of holding entire sectors. This is what we've been preparing for, Jake continued. Not conquest, but protection. Not dominion, but guardianship. The galaxy faces extinction, and humanity is the only force capable of preventing it. The political implications rippled through the chamber like shock waves. Every territorial dispute, every trade agreement, every carefully negotiated balance of power had just become irrelevant in the face of an existential threat that made their petty squabbles meaningless. What do you need from us? Ambassador Kthara asked, her species' ancient loyalty reasserting itself despite 10,000 years of genetic suppression. Military integration, Jake replied immediately. Every fleet, every defensive installation, every species' unique capabilities coordinated under Eternal King tactical doctrine. The Devourers aren't just another enemy. They're a force of entropy that consumes consciousness itself. Fighting them requires unity of purpose that transcends politics. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours and nearly resulted in several declarations of war as species grappled with the collapse of their carefully maintained power structures. But ultimately, the evidence was too overwhelming to deny, and the approaching threat too terrible to face divided. The Concordia Accords were dissolved and replaced by the Eternal Defense Compact, placing all galactic military forces under human command for the duration of the crisis. It was a political revolution that should have taken decades to negotiate, compressed into a single day by the weight of approaching annihilation. But even as the council session ended with unprecedented unity, Jake knew the real challenge was yet to come. The Devourers weren't just a military threat. They were a force that attacked the very concept of individual consciousness. Every battle against them was also a battle against the dissolution of self, against the terrible hunger that sought to absorb all thought and memory into its collective void. As he returned to Earth aboard the Eternal Vigilance, Jake felt the weight of 3 million years of galactic guardianship settling on his shoulders. The Eternal Kings had earned their title not through conquest, but through their willingness to stand between consciousness and chaos, regardless of the cost. The fleet compositions were already being transmitted to Earth's command centers, 7,000 species contributing everything from massive dreadnoughts to swarms of fighter craft. The diversity was staggering, but Jake's enhanced consciousness could see how each piece fit into the greater tactical puzzle. "Admiral," he said to Thorne as they approached Earth's orbital defense perimeter, "Initiate Protocol Omega. It's time to wake up the big guns." Throughout human space, ancient structures that had slept beneath planets and hidden in asteroid fields began stirring to life. Weapons that had been built to fight gods prepared for activation, and defenses designed to protect entire galaxies began drawing power from the quantum foam itself. The Devourers had consumed 3 galaxies, but they had never faced the Eternal Kings at full strength. That was about to change. The war for the survival of consciousness itself was about to begin, and humanity was finally ready to remember why they had once been called the Guardians of Infinity. But as the ancient weapons came online and the sleeping fleets awakened, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the Devourers' early arrival wasn't random. Something had drawn them here with specific purpose, and the implications of that realization would change everything about how the coming war would be fought. The Lost Prince had awakened his people, but the enemy he faced might be more familiar than anyone suspected. The final battle began not with the clash of fleets, but with a whisper in Jake's mind that carried the weight of cosmic revelation. Standing in the command center deep beneath Earth's surface, surrounded by holographic displays showing the approaching Devourer Armada, he suddenly understood why they had accelerated their timeline. "They're not just coming to destroy us," he said aloud, his voice causing every awakened human in the facility to pause. "They're coming home." Admiral Thorne turned from a tactical display showing the enemy fleet's final approach vectors. "My prince." "The Devourers," Jake said, his enhanced consciousness parsing genetic memories that went back to the very beginning of the Eternal King's reign. "They're not an external threat. They're us. They're what the Eternal Kings became when they lost their way." The revelation hit the command center like a quantum shockwave. Through the neural links that connected all awakened humans, the truth spread across Earth's population in seconds. The great enemy they had been preparing to fight was their own fallen kingdom, returned to consume what remained of their former subjects. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Blake, but even as she spoke, her own genetic memories were confirming Jake's realization. The historical records show the Eternal Kings fighting the Devourers not. "The records show some Eternal Kings fighting others," Jake corrected, the full scope of the ancient tragedy becoming clear in his mind. 3 million years ago, our people split into 2 factions. Those who believed consciousness should be preserved and protected, and those who believed it should be collected and unified under a single will. The approaching fleet suddenly made terrible sense. The Devourers weren't randomly consuming galaxies. They were following the expansion pattern of the original Eternal King Empire, methodically absorbing every world their ancestors had once protected. Each consumed consciousness added to their collective power, bringing them closer to their ultimate goal of universal unity under their control. "Sir," reported King Alexios from his position at the quantum communication array, "we're receiving a transmission from the Devourer flagship. They're requesting to speak with the Lost Prince directly." Jake felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders as he stepped forward to accept the communication. The face that materialized in the holographic display was hauntingly familiar, an eternal king like himself, but transformed by 10,000 years of consciousness consumption into something that retained the form while losing the essence of humanity. "Brother," the figure said, and its voice carried harmonics that spoke of billions of absorbed minds. "I am what was once called King Mordith, though I'm so much more now. I come to offer you choice. Join us willingly, and your consciousness will be preserved within our collective. Resist, and we'll take it regardless." Jake stared into eyes that held the screams of 3 destroyed galaxies, and felt not fear, but profound sadness. This had been one of his people, a guardian who had lost sight of what they were meant to protect in pursuit of absolute control. "You're offering slavery disguised as unity," Jake replied. "Every consciousness you've absorbed still exists in isolation within your collective, experiencing eternal imprisonment while you use their knowledge and memories." Mordith's expression shifted, something that might have been surprise flickering across features that seemed carved from living shadow. "You can sense them? Interesting. Your awakening has progressed farther than our calculations suggested. But it changes nothing. Unity is inevitable. Order will replace chaos. The suffering of individual existence will end." "Individual existence isn't suffering," Jake said firmly. "It's the greatest gift consciousness can experience. The ability to choose, to grow, to love, and lose, and learn, that's what makes life worth protecting." Spoken like someone who has never held the screams of a trillion dying worlds in his mind, Mordith replied, "We have seen what individual consciousness leads to: war, hatred, the strong consuming the weak. Our way offers peace." Jake felt the weight of every awakened human consciousness connected to him through the planetary neural network. 3 billion minds, each one unique, each one choosing to stand against the terrible uniformity being offered. Their diversity was their strength, their individual perspectives combining to create something greater than any single consciousness could achieve. "Your way offers the peace of the grave," Jake said. "We choose the chaos of life." The transmission ended, but in its wake came something far more immediate and terrifying. The Devourer fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and with them came a psychic pressure that threatened to crush every individual mind in range. "All units, activate consciousness barriers," Jake ordered, his voice carrying across every human frequency simultaneously. "Do not let them into your minds." The battle that followed defied every principle of conventional warfare. The Devourer ships moved with perfect coordination, their collective consciousness allowing them to anticipate human tactics before they were fully formed. But humanity fought with something the Devourers had forgotten: the wild unpredictability of individual creativity. Earth's hidden weapons came fully online, revealing the true scope of Eternal King technology. The Sahara Desert lifted away like a blanket to expose a sensor array that could track individual thoughts across galactic distances. The ocean floors split open to reveal manufacturing complexes that began producing weapons in real time, adapting their design based on moment-by-moment tactical analysis. But the most powerful weapon wasn't technological. It was the human spirit itself. Every awakened human became a node in a vast network that operated on principles the Devourers couldn't comprehend. Where they sought unity through absorption, humanity achieved coordination through cooperation. Individual minds remained distinct while working toward common goals, creating tactical solutions that emerge from the intersection of billions of unique perspectives. "They're adapting too quickly," reported Admiral Blake as the battle raged across the solar system. "Every strategy we develop, they counter before we can fully implement it. Because they're trying to fight us like we're another collective," Jake realized. "But we're not. We're something they've forgotten how to combat. Truly independent minds choosing to work together." He reached out through the planetary consciousness network, touching every human mind simultaneously without overwhelming their individuality. "Stop fighting like a military force," he broadcast. "Fight like humans." The change was immediate and dramatic. Human forces that had been operating under traditional tactical doctrines suddenly exploded into chaotic creativity. Fighter pilots began using maneuvers that defied physics and logic, but somehow worked. Capital ships coordinated through intuition rather than command structures. Scientists in underground laboratories improvised weapons that shouldn't have been possible, but functioned anyway because someone believed they would. The Devourers reeled under the assault of pure human unpredictability. Their collective consciousness, for all its accumulated knowledge, couldn't process the quantum uncertainty of 3 billion minds, each making independent decisions that somehow added up to coherent strategy. "Impossible," Mordith's voice echoed across all frequencies as his flagship found itself surrounded by human vessels that had arrived through routes that didn't exist until someone imagined them into being. How are you coordinating without central control? We're not coordinating, Jake replied. His consciousness expanded across the entire solar system while remaining distinctly his own. We're improvising. It's something you gave up when you chose unity over diversity. The final phase of the battle came when Jake realized that victory wasn't about destroying the Devourer fleet. It was about offering them a choice they hadn't considered in 10,000 years. As human forces pressed their chaotic advantage, he broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. To every consciousness trapped within the Devourer collective, he said, his voice somehow reaching the imprisoned minds despite their absorption. You still have choice. You can break free. The effect was immediate and catastrophic to Devourer unity. Across their fleet, absorbed consciousnesses that had been suppressed for millennia began asserting their independence. The collective that had been their strength became their weakness as billions of minds suddenly remembered what it felt like to be individuals. Mordetha's flagship began to break apart not from external damage, but from internal rebellion. What have you done? He screamed across the neural link. Reminded them who they used to be, Jake replied. Every consciousness has the right to choose its own existence. The Devourer fleet didn't just retreat, it transformed. Ships that had operated as extensions of a single will suddenly became independent vessels as their crews remembered their original identities. Some chose to maintain their connection to the collective, but as partners rather than slaves. Others broke free entirely, their consciousness bursting with the joy of rediscovered individuality. Mordeth himself stood at the center of this transformation, feeling the collective consciousness that had defined him for 10,000 years fragmenting as the minds within it chose their own paths. But instead of fighting it, he found himself remembering something he thought he had lost forever, the simple pleasure of a single, unique thought that belonged to him alone. Brother, he said to Jake across the void, his voice now carrying only one consciousness instead of billions. I had forgotten what it felt like to be myself. It's never too late to remember, Jake replied. That's what makes us human. In the aftermath of the battle, as the Sol system settled into an uneasy peace, Jake stood once again in Earth's command center. But now he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by representatives from across the galaxy, including former Devourers who had chosen to reclaim their individual identities. What happens now? Asked Admiral Blake. The threat is ended, but the galaxy will never be the same. Jake smiled, feeling the weight of 3 million years of guardianship finally beginning to lift. Now we do what we should have done from the beginning. We protect without controlling. We guide without ruling. We help every consciousness in the galaxy choose its own path. The Eternal Kings had returned, but they returned as servants of consciousness rather than its masters. The galaxy would face new challenges, encounter new threats, and discover new wonders. But it would do so with the knowledge that somewhere among the stars, humanity stood ready to defend the right of every thinking being to choose their own destiny. Jake Harrison, the lost prince who had awakened to save the galaxy, looked out at the stars and saw not an empire to rule, but a garden to tend. And in that moment, he understood that this was what the Eternal Kings had always been meant to be, not conquerors of consciousness, but its eternal guardians. The legends were true. He was him. But more importantly, he was choosing to be something better than legend had remembered. He was choosing to be truly human. The war was over. The real work of protecting consciousness could finally begin.